Our reading is taken from the Old Testament book of Genesis, chapter 28. We will be reading from verse 10 to verse 19. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. The story of Jacob needs repeating again and again. From this trickery lowest moment of his life to his highest moment at Bethel, today's story, Jacob portrays for each one of us and for every age in this world, a prodigal son who wandered into the unknown, but never go entirely away from God. That is why I said this story should be repeated again and again. Because Jacob was a wanderer, wandering away from home. Even he thought that he has been wandering away from God, but he was wrong. He never got entirely away from God. To refresh your memory of last week's message, let me give you a brief summary of the story of this prodigal son of the Old Testament. Esau and Jacob were born as twin sons to Isaac and Rebekah. Esau became an outdoor man and hunter, while Jacob was a tent dweller and shepherd, who, by the way, should cook exceptionally well. So one day, Esau came in from hunting and smelled the food Jacob was cooking. Esau was very hungry, and so he bartered off his birthright for the food Jacob was cooking. Not only that, Jacob later went to his father Isaac to take the old man's blessing, which rightfully belonged to Esau. Jacob went so far as to cover his arms with the skin of animals, so that if Isaac should touch him, Jacob would seem to have hairy arms, just like Esau, his brother. The disguise was successful, and Isaac gave blessing to Jacob. When Esau learned of it, he was so hungry that he gave the blessing. He was so, deceived that he gave blessing to Jacob. When Esau learned of it, he was so angry that Jacob had to flee for his life. Because as today's story begins, we see Jacob, coming to a desolate place, only himself and no other present. and he went forth because this is part of his journey to save himself. As today's story tells us, Jacob made a camp at sunset in a lonely place. He took a stone as his pillow and slept on it. That night, Jacob had a strange dream because he saw in that dream a ladder. Actually, it was a ramp. How do you perceive that? Don't perceive that as the ladder or stairway in your house. Perceive it as something that when you drive on freeway, that was the ramp entrance into the freeway. So it is something that is higher and higher. It is a ramp. He saw angels going up and down on that ramp, and he heard the Lord saying to him that the land under his feet would be his and his descendants, and his descendants would fill the earth. You know what? Up to this time, there has seemed to be no way out of trouble for Jacob. He was running away to save his own skin. But suddenly, he realized that God opened heaven to him. Well, how often have you heard the statement, man's extremity is God's opportunity? Have you ever heard about that statement? Sometimes God doesn't have a chance to reach people other than reaching out to him or her when he or she is in dire situations. Jacob awake from his dream, and he gave his dream some kind of assessment, some kind of interpretation. This is what he said. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Jacob interpreted his dream as an encounter with God face to face. Because he was, he used to think that once he left his own homeland, God will not be there with him. But he was obviously wrong. Brothers and sisters, Jacob even called that place, changed the name of that place from Luz to Bethel. Bethel in Hebrew means the house of God, because he perceived that strange place was God's home. Well, I have just recounted the story of Jacob, the prodigal son. But what can we learn from it? What can we learn from that strange story? I propose this morning that we learn three things from this prodigal son of the Old Testament. First of all, Jacob realized values when they appear. Jacob realized value, precious things when they appear. Being more interested in satisfying his bodily needs at the moment than the needs of the future. If you remember what I said last week, Esau did not fully realize what the birthright could mean. Esau did not treasure values, but Jacob sensed its value and he wanted it. When something is precious in front of Jacob, Jacob can appreciate the value and he would like to have it. Secondly, not just the value of the birthright. Jacob also sensed the value of his dream at Bethel. Jacob realized that in that dream, God was literally reconfirming to him the covenant God made with his ancestors, Abraham and Isaac. He realized that in the years to come, as the father of 12 sons, he would become the father of a great nation called Israel. He immediately sensed the value of that dream. And thirdly, Jacob sensed that his value was greater than just being a wanderer. He sensed his own value as greater than just a prodigal son of the Old Testament, so to speak. Shepherds in those days, Jacob was one of the shepherds. Shepherds in those days usually live a wandering nomadic life. But after this Bethel experience, Jacob had more on his mind. To be the great man that he would eventually become. Jacob knows that he would have to change. It was some years later that Jacob, the prodigal son, left Haran with 2 wives. He prayed to God for help as he returned to his homeland. And you know the story. This story is in Genesis 32. In the night before meeting his brother Esau again, there came an angel in the form of a man to wrestle with Jacob. Jacob would not let the angelic visitor go until that angel blessed him. The angel changed his name from Jacob, the cheater, the supplanter, he supplant. He would choose something in place of someone else's right. Jacob the supplanter, Jacob the cheater, known for trickery and cheating, the angel changed his name to Israel. Jacob named the place Peniel. Again, Jacob on his trip away from home, he changed a place from Luz to Bethel. But on his way home, he also changed a place name. He changed that place name into Peniel, meaning the face of God. Bethel means the house of God. Peniel means the face of God. Jacob interpreted once again his experience as a face-to-face encounter with God. Twice, 2 times, even though the place names are different. House of God, face of God, basically same meaning. Jacob believed that in both places, he encountered God face to face. The next day, because of that experience, facing God, that should be a death experience. He should have died because he lived so that he believes that his encounter with his brother who hated him 20-some years ago, he believed that he will survive that encounter because even facing God, he survived. So that gave him a sign that he will survive his encounter with Esau. So the point of today's story is that Jacob, the prodigal son, returned home and became a changed man. He learned that trickery doesn't work because sooner or later, the trickery will be exposed. Jacob learned that wandering in an unknown wilderness can be a mighty lonely experience. And he learned the value of having an insight into things of higher worth. In fact, there is an interesting postlude to Jacob's life. The book of Genesis later tells us how Joseph, one of his sons, how Joseph moved, actually transported the bones of Jacob back to, Canaan, back to the promised land. As you can see, even Joseph, who had become probably the prime minister of Egypt, had high regard of Jacob, this person. Jacob was well respected even by people in Egypt. How come that Jacob transformed himself from a tricky person to a person that everybody respected? It was this encounter at Bethel. So brothers and sisters, think about it. If God can do that, such a great change, transformation to such a lowly person such a, trickery person like Jacob, what can God do for you? I think that God can change you into a better person too. So this is today's lesson. I will turn to the Taiwanese congregation.